of what we're doing. If we can put results at the center, then we're able to build these accountability systems. So Robert, if you can go to the next slide. Here's what we're going to learn today, right? We'll just jump right into it. How do you transform vague district goals into measurable success, right? We have this conversation constantly when we work with partners and clarity and they give a goal, right? If that goal is written well, then it sets the system up for accountability throughout its life. We're also going to look at traditional school improvement efforts and why they fall short. One thing I'll propose today is that we look at one kind of data really often, but we neglect another piece of data that's really important. So we're going to look at two kinds of data today. Also, the role of data in setting meaningful goals and tracking progress. So we're going to give two different really practical approaches to setting goals and monitoring both implementation and effectiveness. How do we align funding? What does this mean for academic return on investment? So if we're investing in strategies, what is the return on those strategies? And I know the AROI, which we talk about often, is really important, especially given our tight budgets these days. The last thing is just practical strategies for us to all identify root causes and to constantly improve within our system. So these are the goals today. Given, just looking at the call, I'd love if folks are comfortable. You can stay off camera, whatever you're comfortable with, I'm totally fine with. But I would love for everyone just to share who you are and the role that you play. I think it's always nice to just know who's on the call and for you guys to all connect. The most valuable part of these webinars half the time is you all connecting with each other. So if you don't mind just saying who you are and the role that you play.
I can start. I'm Nicole Rivera. I'm going to keep my camera off. I have a sinus infection, so I'm working from home, but I didn't want to
No
miss
worries.
it.
No pressure on cameras. You can do
But
whatever.
I work at Aspen Public Schools, and I'm the chief academic officer.
Awesome. Very cool. Glad you're here.
No follow. I also work at Aspen and oversee data and assessment. My name's
Great.
Hillary.
Thanks, Hillary.
Jeff Feckner, Learning Choice Academy. Nice to see you, Marshall.
Yeah, good to see you.
And Assistant Director.
Awesome.
I'm Leah Lippincott, Olive Grove Charter Schools in California. I am Teaching and Learning Support Coordinator, which means a lot. So I'm constantly working with data, assessment, interventions, everything.
Yeah, that's one of those really awesome kitchen sink titles where it's like lots of duties as assigned. I'm glad you're here.
And hi, everyone. I'm in Leah's district as well, Lisa O'Shea. I'm the Learning Center Director here at Olive Grove Charter School in Santa Barbara.
Love it. Glad you're here, Lisa.
Thank you.
Alana, you did a peek in.
I came in late, so I don't know if everybody's introducing themselves. I'm Carlene. I met you, Marshall, at the Parsec Summit. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
I'm currently admin on special assignment for the Ed Services Department, but focused mostly on student achievement and learning data, all of this stuff.
Love it. Great. Hopefully we can help give some frameworks that'll make your job a little easier today.
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, I'm Alan Rito, principal at River Gold Elementary.
Great. Glad you're here, Alan.
My name's Matt Wilkinson. I'm a TOSA at Yosemite Unified. I'm at Mr. Riedel's school site, River Gold.
Great.
I'm Alana. I'm the school coordinator, which is like assistant director up at Golden Eagle Charter School in Siskiyou County.
Excellent. Glad you're here. I think I wasn't keeping track 100%. If everybody's good, this is your last chance to introduce yourself. Practicing teacher wait time. All right. Let's jump in. Robert, if you'll go to the next slide. today we're going to really look at, when we talk about accountability, there's this idea that it's this, we call it the effort versus result gap. So, you know, as a principal, I confess that I wish I could go back and try again after all the years of like being in education, because when I think about it, I really focused on making sure I got the things done. That's really what I focused on. Like, did program A get implemented? And what about program B needs to be completed? And what about program C is not quite finished? But expanding that one step further and really just making sure that we're constantly thinking about not just what did we get done, but what was the impact of what we did. And, you know, a lot of times we talk to partners about, there's this quadrant where, you know, some people just get lucky. Some school districts just have incredible families and demographics, and there's lots of things going right for the district, and they just do well. And they don't really know why. And you can see that in the dashboards. There are schools that just perform incredibly. And then if you look at their demographics, you can tell, you know, it is what it is. Where they live, they have great kids. There's also schools that don't perform well, and they just don't know why, right? So trying to move over into the category where we're either performing well and we know why and we can replicate it consistently, or we're not performing where we want to be, but we know why. We've identified the problem, we know the stories behind the problem, and we can identify a solution. And then we can trust that that solution will work. So we want schools, like all of us in working in education, we want to be in the realm of learning or leading. We either want to know why it's not working and have a plan, or we want to know it's working and that we can replicate why it worked. So this results-based accountability helps us think in a little bit of a different way. So an example would be, you know, a school may implement a tutoring program, but they may not track their impact on student achievement. Or, you know, just the other day I was at a district, a partner that we love, they're great. But we started talking about Avid. And they started, you know, talking about, yeah, we do Avid because we think Avid really helps kids across the board prepare for college type level rigor. So then we asked, well, that's awesome. You guys are investing a lot in Avid. How's it going? And, you know, they kind of all looked at each other and they're like, well, I mean, we've got the director in place and the program's here and the teachers are trained. Say, awesome. Well, are your kids performing better on these more rigorous college courses? I don't really know. Have you noticed? I haven't really noticed. So the focus was on the implementation, but then asking the question, is it working? And so results-based accountability shifts the focus from did we try, did we do all the things, to did we achieve results and do we know why? So that's the, you know, we're going to have some real practical things that you can do today that help kind of change how the system is thinking about results. Robert, you can move forward. So this is really important. This is the frame of, there's two kinds of data to measure. And I think we typically, as a principal, we focus on the top, right? So on the left side, if we talk at the, you know, the population level change, what change do you want to make in your kids? What change are you seeking, right? Those are the results. We're about to jump into testing season. How far distance from standard are you? What percentage of your kids are meeting or exceeding expectations? These are the results that we seek, right? The result is that our kids are academically ready and prepared to lead a life of choice. That's the result we want. We want kids that are prepared, they're socially and emotionally well, they feel equipped, and they're going to be able to navigate through the system. That's the result we want. Then we have to identify indicators that define that result. So if we say we want kids that are academically ready, socially and emotionally well, and are prepared for their next level of their journey, how do we measure that? What are the indicators that would help us answer the question, is that true? And to be honest, a lot of times that's really, really difficult. when we say, I want kids to be academically ready and socially and emotionally well. Awesome. How do you measure that? How do you know that's happening? How do you know if that's not happening? What indicators are there so that you can raise the flag if you know this isn't working? Our kids are not socially and emotionally well. How do you know? So those indicators are important. Then we all have strategies and programs. This is like the bulk of our work. Like we identify strategies and we launch programs intended to drive the indicators. So if we want ELA performance to go up, we institute programs to drive ELA performance up, right? This is where we shift to the second kind of data, and we're going to dive into this a lot more today. One question around population accountability is, we're implementing a strategy. Is it moving the needles we want it to move? And are we achieving the results that we want? We talk about that all the time in education. But what I don't know if we talk about as much is, we chose and we spent money on this program. Have we implemented it in the way we hoped or planned? And are we meeting the targets of effectiveness along the way? So are we monitoring, if we bought something, are we monitoring that it's being used effectively? And is it being used at scale consistently across the system? And then second, in the short term, do we see signs that it's working? So there's this idea of like, are we making a difference in the lives of kids? Are we achieving better test scores, right? We talk about that a lot. But the other conversation is, are we implementing this program with like intense fidelity? So for a while, I was a researcher and I researched educational strategies. And one thing we always talked about is if you want to know if a strategy works or not, you have to ensure what we called potency of treatment. So if you put 100 kids into a program and you just kind of half do it, you don't know if it worked. You have to ensure that you have potency of treatment. So if you're purchasing a program like, for example, Take Flight for dyslexia, are you squeezing every drip out of the Take Flight lemon? Like, are you getting every bit of juice out of the squeeze, right? How well are you implementing, and is it making a difference? So these two kinds of measures are really important. They're also very different, right? This is, managers are looking at performance accountability. So assistant superintendents are talking to principals and saying, have you implemented? How's it going? Are you seeing signs of effectiveness? To make sure that along the way, implementation and effectiveness is monitored. And then typically end of year, we kind of look up at our test scores and see if the results came with that accountability. If you know you implemented well, then you can make informed decisions about, did it work? If you don't implement well, you really can't make a decision of if it worked or not, right? So this accountability around the results is really important. And these two kinds of data are important to think about. And you measure these in different ways. So we're going to talk about those two types of measures each individually. I'll stop for a second, though, because you guys are way deeper in this than I am. So I'll just open it up for discussion. Is there anything that people are like squirming in your chair, of something you want to add to that conversation, or challenges or suggestions? All right, get ready, because you guys we're going to get you talking here in a sec. All right, let's go to the next slide, Robert. Okay, so let's think about, this is what RBA, so if you look at this book that's like Trying Hard is Not Good Enough, this is the thinking process of RBA. And they always talk about the leaky roof. Okay, so let's look at this example. First, what are you experiencing? Right? So if I walk into my house and there is water all over the floor, That's the experience that I'm having. I can describe it. I walk in, there's water everywhere. I can see it dripping from the ceiling. This is what I'm experiencing in my house. How can I measure the extent of the leak? I have to figure that out. Well, I could put a bucket there and I could measure the inches of water that are being collected from the leak. It's important then to know the story behind the baseline. So right now I have a baseline. Every hour there is 2 inches of water in my bucket. So now I know, like I have a graph over here. I know how much water is leaking into my house. And I know that if I don't do anything, this is where I'm headed. And then what's the story behind that? Well, I know I have an old roof. I know I have missing tiles. I know there was a big rainstorm. Like all the story really matters. And I think you guys in education know that better than anybody. Like we can look at the baseline. I have water on the floor. The water is coming in at a certain rate. What is the story behind that? And I think that story is important. And then who are the partners that'll be a part of fixing this issue, right? We have a roofer and my good old brother-in-law. I have 3 brother-in-laws actually. So one of my brother-in-laws, the one that I like, that was another dad joke. They're going to come help me fix it. And we've got a roof problem. So then I have to think about, what do I know that works? Well, I know that if I have tiles that aren't 20 years old, that'll work. I know that if my roof has good tiles and that they don't have holes, that'll work. I can replace the tiles. I can get a new roof altogether. I can call insurance and get a whole new roof. I know that works. I could also just move. Like, I know that works. I could move, just change houses. These are options. And then I have to identify from those options, what's the best action plan? So I've decided my brother-in-law that I like, he's going to come help. He's going to replace the tiles this weekend. That's the strategy I choose. You can see in the graph, I've monitored the water that's leaking, and you can see that there is a forecast of this is what will happen if I don't make a change. But then I also know like the desired bend of that trend. I know where I want that trend to go, but I'm going to have to do something to change the trajectory of that trend. So I know this is a goofy example with leaking water. But the more, in my opinion, we can get our teachers and our principals and our administrators talking about our experiences in this way. What is the experience? How do we measure the experience to quantify it and to know it? What's the story behind the experience? Who are the partners that are involved? What do we know works and what have we chosen to do? If that's really clear from the teacher level to the superintendent level, it starts to really put the results. Like we're wanting less water in the bucket and everyone knows that. And the more that everyone knows, because as a principal, if you would have walked into my school and gone to a teacher and said, what are your principal's most important goals? What measures are your principal trying to drive? I don't know if my teachers could have answered that. I don't know if I shared that broadly enough. And as a principal, I definitely didn't always know, like the superintendent, like what measures are they moving? I felt disconnected. So the more that experience is pulled together, the better. All right, Robert, we'll go forward. Okay. Oh, just one back. You skipped my favorite one, Robert. This is where we're all supposed to play. All right. So let's talk ELA performance. Let's talk about it. Let's go through the thinking process. You guys are going to have to unmute and play along or I'm going to feel really awkward. You can see the trend. By the way, this is the trend. I mean, this is a pretty common trend nationally, right? People are working their butt off and they've got this like somewhat flat trend. So you can see here, we've got 3 data points, which forecasts, if we continue doing what we're doing, we're going to pretty much get this ELA performance. But what we desire is to bend that upward. So let's go through the storyline. Like, what are you guys experiencing with ELA? What does it look like, sound like, feel like in your schools?
You're talking about like test results. You're talking about every day in the classroom? What are you asking for, Marshall?
It's a good question, Alan. You're getting ahead. You're trying to be the valedictorian. Just kidding. I'm just saying, what are you experiencing when you walk the halls of your school? What are you experiencing when it comes to kids learning English fluency and comprehension and writing? What is your experience?
I'd say our experience, there's a lot of kids that are behind at this point, whether it's due to COVID, screens, whatever. Like, I mean, it's pretty easy for a parent to just hand their kid a screen when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Then all of a sudden they're compliant and they're like, hey, I never have a problem with my kid at home. They're really good. That's a challenge. I think we're seeing like, lack of writing skills, lack of reading skills, in general. But I think my teachers know what's expected of them at least a little bit, standards-based goals, definitely working towards the rigor of the standards. I mean, that is the rigor that students need to attain. Yeah, I think that we're seeing teachers work really hard on trying to build those skills. Maybe not always working with the direction that they need.
Yep. Alan, you provided a lot there. That's awesome. So the experience is some kids are behind. Discipline is tough these days, given like the screen thing. What is your primary measure? I'm just going to ask this group. If you had to pick one measure that you're like, this is the measure, like, how do I know how ELA is going in my school? What's the measure you pick?
We often look at the CASP and the STAR scores.
Which one's better?
I think we look at the CASP scores for kind of performance level. And that's only 3rd through 8th and 11th. The STAR scores we tend to use more when we're looking at growth because we can do the fall to spring growth. So I think they're both useful for different things.
Love it. Other folks, what's the needle that you care about? Like if you really want to know, are kids mastering the English language? Which measure is most important? Anybody different than CASP or like STAR? Is there another measure anybody else uses? What about grades? Anybody think grades? Is grades a good way to go or not? I'm curious.
I'm trying to use Mastery Connect, which is the formative assessment tool, so that teachers can see standard by standard. We're identifying power standards through Parsec, to really focus on those big guns, but really just the formative assessment process and seeing how that breaks down, I think is a better tool for us at this point.
Yeah. I loved Master Connect. I used that as a principal, by the way.
Yeah, you had mentioned that to me. It's been really great and it's user friendly, and I think the data that you get is just like actionable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For our schools, because we're charters, we're very bound to the Smarter Balance. So for renewals and things like that. So that's kind of our, earth in the window. But for on the ground, seeing how our students are progressing, we use iReady, and iReady has a projected proficiency metric on there for where we think they're going to land for Smarter Balance. So we kind of see how we're trending there. And then we also use some of the IABs provided from the state as well to see how the students are performing on those.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, you guys. I think you're also highlighting part of this challenge, but I think it's important is what are you experiencing, right? Kids are struggling with ELA. I see it in data, every data point I look at. How are y'all measuring it? It's pretty clear. Like you guys know, like this is how we measure if ELA's getting better or getting worse. You guys are also already telling me, like Alan told me a lot about the story behind the baseline. Did you notice? It's not just kids aren't doing as well. That doesn't have any color to it. But Alan walks the halls of his school. So he knows the story behind the baseline. There's like some discipline stuff in the story behind the baseline. There's some like screen and attention issues in the baseline. Like there's a lot of story behind that ELA score. If you don't know that story, you're kind of stuck from go, right? So what is the experience? How are we measuring it? And you have to know the story behind the measure, because I'm going to give you a spoiler alert. I'm going to tell you in a minute that all data is bad. All data is the best available data, BAD. It's bad. Like, you only have the data you have, but you also have to use data. But if you don't know the story behind the data, then you can really go off track, because you can make a conclusion about data that's not grounded in your story, and then you're off on some path that's not related to your kids at all. So we have stories behind the baseline. We know those with ELA. Anybody else have any other stories, like your specific context of why your ELA scores are what they are?
I've got lots of stories. We're a non-classroom based charter, but we have programs. So we have about half our kids are coming into classes 4 days a week, and half are primarily like what you think of as independent study, where they meet with their teacher once a week or every other week. And looking into our data, we've definitely got like a tale of two schools. When we look at the kids that are coming into classes, the ELA scores look great and are improving over the last 3 years. When we look at our primarily independent study, our scores are terrible and they seem to be decreasing over time. So one of the things I think that's part of our story behind the baseline is that in our independent study world, there's a lot of variability in how ELA happens. And maybe not a whole lot of not enough teacher control over that process. So that's
Holy
kind of
cow. I mean, like, listen to that. That is a learning and leading position, right? That is knowing, here's the number, and I know why the number is what it is, right? Like, I've investigated that. That's the story behind the baseline. And if we don't know that, like, that's why we invest so much in Parsec Real, is we can show you the numbers on analytics, but why? Like, what's the story behind the baseline? That's where the magic starts to come alive. And then, we have to think about who are the partners involved in ELA. And we all know these partners. There's reading interventionists, there's teachers, there's the principal, there's SPED department. So who is it that plays a role in moving this ELA needle? We've got to know that. Who are the players? The next thing we have to know is what works. Your needle, your trend is going like this, and you're betting your money on what you believe works. So I'm curious just to hear maybe from some folks we haven't heard from. If you had to bet all your money on one intervention to improve ELA, what do you know from research and from experience works? I think Alana gave us one example. Kiddos coming in for in-class teaching, it works. They know, they have evidence that works, right? They have a baseline, they've kind of done an experiment, and they know that that works. What else? Are there programs? Mastery Connect, I heard Mastery Connect, that works. What else? Anything else? Programs you've used that works? One-on-one, small group targeted instruction. You have to invest in that. That's an FTE issue, right? That's a class size issue. Yeah, Alana's saying, for non-classroom, what do we know works for kiddos that are at home in a non-classroom based charter? So a part of this thinking process is, who are the partners? And we've got to know what works, because we're going to have to propose a change package. Like, we're going to have to invest our money in something. So we've got to come with some idea of what works. From that, we then decide and we choose, like, what is our action plan? And then we monitor that action plan over time. All right, Robert. So when we look at this trend analysis, I think this is why when we're looking at data and we're looking at data over time, trends are incredibly powerful to empower your team. A lot of times, like in our data insights meetings, we'll show like, here's last year and here's this year. And the more and more we push on that, the more and more I encourage partners to use trend data as often as you can, because trend data shows you here is our baseline and here's where we're going if we keep things the same. And for some people, that's great. If your baseline is on a steady increase, you want that to continue. If your baseline is flat, you probably want to bend that upward. So it will require a change. And what change is it? And did it work? And then obviously, if your trend's headed downward, you need to bend that trend upward. So then you've got to go through that thinking process. Like, what is it that works? You can see the dotted line would be me taking the trend. This is fictitious data from our partner, from our demo board. But you can see, like, if this were your school, you have negative trends going on here. So there's got to be a change package. Like, there's got to be a hypothesis of, we're going to put money toward this so that we can bend that trend. And these trends are really important because I think if teachers and interventionists and principals, if everyone is seeing the trend and they know that they play an important role in bending that trend and they know that that's the goal, it kind of rallies people around the same result. All right, Robert. Okay, so population accountability. So now you move this forward to, like, how do we think about results at the center of our work? There's two ways to think. The first way is population accountability. So you start by saying, what change do we want to make in the world? Like, we want kids to graduate from our schools or to move through our systems. We want them to be academically ready. I don't know. You guys know, like, what is it you want for your kids? This is aspirational, right? Then we have to create results that we're following, right? Like, what results define that change we want to make? And then how are we experiencing that? Like, what are we experiencing in our systems right now? That then leads us to the need to develop indicators. So what I find is a lot of school partners, this process of identifying the indicators you care about most sometimes gets left behind. We kind of get drug into our state indicators. But what are the indicators that you care about? What are your baselines? And what is your targeted curve change? So knowing that and being really clear, this is what we envision. This is the indicator we care about. This is the trend of the indicator. And this is where we want that indicator to go. Then you study the stories behind those indicators and those baselines, identify partners. You look at your research agenda, you look at your experience, you identify what works, you create criteria for what programs you'll choose, and then you put them into strategy and action plan. Once you put them into a plan, then you go back and monitor your indicators to see if they're working. Results-based accountability will say there's these 7 questions. What are the quality of life conditions that we want for the children or families? What would these conditions look like if we could see them? This is like a really fun question to ask teachers and to ask, in professional development. What would these conditions look like? What do we want for kids? And what would those conditions look like in our schools? And then how can we measure if those conditions exist? How are we doing on the most important of these measures? Right? By the way, you guys will have access to all these slides, so don't feel like you have to write them down. You'll have all this. How are we doing on the most important of these measures? Who are the partners that have a role to play? What works? And what do we propose we do? So just getting into this results-based accountability, it shifts the mentality of, what program will I implement? That's typically kind of the first thing we go to is like, what program are we implementing? But if we start with, what is the change? What's the experience? What are the indicators and baselines? What's the story behind those? And then what do we know works to bend that trend? So this framework helps us think and put results at the center of what we're doing rather than programs, right? So results first rather than programs and operations first. All right, Robert, you can go forward. So from vision to indicators. So getting to indicators is always challenging. So RBA and I, like, my background's in data science. So you can go to the next slide, Robert. It's the good one. When you're choosing indicators, you guys, when we work with partners with clarity and strategic planning, This is the hardest thing. There's so many indicators that it gets overwhelming. So I think it's important, like I'm proposing today, like all data is bad data. All of your data is bad. It is not a perfect representation of your kid. You're in social science. So all the measures have lots of error embedded in the system. But what you've got to do is find the best available data. So when we talk data, I usually talk about these 3 conditions that help you identify which indicators are best. So first is communication power. Does the indicator communicate to a broad and diverse audience? So you could think about like IXL, for example. IXL has a really high communication power, in my opinion. It's very easy to understand. It speaks in a really fun language. People understand the numbers. It makes sense. In contrast, NWEA, it's a little harder to explain, right? Like, oh, we've got an RTI score, and parents will say like, what's an RTI score, right? So NWEA is a little more complicated. It doesn't communicate as well. IXL communicates a little better, in my opinion. Proxy power. Does the indicator say something of central importance about your result? This is where I would say NWEA might be a little better than IXL. It might be harder for a parent to understand, but it seems to be a bit more predictive of the construct. NWEA has way more questions, which brings a bit of validity to the table. IXL doesn't have as many questions and could be predictive with less effort from the students. So you've got to compare these measures. So communication power, proxy power, and then the last one is data power. Do we have quality data on a timely basis? You could hear this a little bit about Mastery Connect. It's actionable, it's now, it's accurate. So you guys will notice a lot of times we'll go look at iReady data, and I'll hear principals making big decisions about iReady. Oh, we've got to really work on whatever. And then we'll go look at iReady and we'll realize, if you look at your kids, your 3rd graders only spent 5 minutes on it. So you've got some issues with the fidelity of how that test happened. So the data power is how quality is the data that you're getting. And so like for us, for example, we'll look at your state test results and we'll correlate that with your local assessment. If you have a lot of type 1 and type 2 error, you might want to rethink that indicator. But if you're pretty well predicting, then you've got data power. So there is an element of really looking at your indicators and trying to decide for your system which ones you care about most. Robert, this next slide, I think it's nice to go about developing a data agenda. So for your team, what data do we care about? I picked one of the really tough, obscure ones, right? So student social and emotional well-being. If we have a goal to improve student and emotional well-being, social and emotional well-being, how do we know? These measures are tough. So as you decide that, it's nice to get with your team and to go through a chart like the one that I created on the slide. So one measure might be SEL related measure in the climate survey. That's what a lot of people do. I'm going to put it in our climate survey. Are you well? Yes or no? Well, I mean, it communicates decently well. People know they took the survey. Its proxy power is low. I find that surveys, the proxy power is low. Is it a good proxy measure of your real well-being? I would say it's not a great one. Data power. Is it very accurate? Is it high quality? I would say no, because you don't get a good response rate. So for me, I would look at that measure and be like, it's okay, but it's not great. Then you take a measure like the DeVuro Student Strengths Assessment for K through 8. This is a really psychometrically sound assessment. It's harder for parents to understand, but it is really high in its proxy power and its data power. A very well valid and accurate assessment, right? So you can look at, here's other ways, SEL Web for K through 3, chronic absenteeism. Some people say chronic absenteeism is a measure for wellness. So, what are your thoughts? Does that communicate well? Does that have a good proxy? Is it powerful as a data? Is it quality data? Discipline referrals, right? Is that a good way to measure social and emotional well-being? So when you're thinking about a results-based accountability frame, you might look at all of these, but I think it's important to know which of these do you care most about? Which of these trends are you going to monitor and constantly have your eye on? This is a frame that I have found useful for teams to think through that. All right, Robert. Okay. So now let's shift to the other part of the coin. So are we achieving English results? Okay, that's results accountability. But let's also talk about performance accountability. So are you monitoring the effectiveness and the implementation of your actions? I think this is the area that perhaps might give you some different things to think about. There's really two quadrants to this 4-quadrant graph. On the left, how much have you done? And on the right, how well have you done it? So there's that dynamic. How many assessments have you given? And how can you measure how well they were given? So like I could say 100% of our students have been assessed. But on the right side, I might say only 70% gave it due attention, right? Only 70% spent more than 5 minutes on it. So it's how much did we do and how well did we do it? The other dynamic on the top and bottom is how hard did we try? And then on the bottom is, was anyone better off because of our efforts? So then if you move that forward, Robert, to the next slide, we start to put this together. So on the top left, how much did we do? How many teachers were trained? How many kids took the diagnostic? How many parents came through the parent night, right? How many units did we teach? How many, fill in the blank, how much did we do? That's important, but quite frankly, it's the least important of all 4 of these quadrants because you can work your butt off and not get any results. But it's important to know, did we do what we were going to say? We had a parent night and only 4 attended. That's good to know. But on the right side is how many parents, on the left side, how many parents attended our parent night? And then on the right side, it might be how many parents, what percentage of those parents filled out their FAFSA form? So it puts results at the center of, did we implement the way we intended? So if your goal is to improve FAFSA completion rates, on the left side, how many people came to the FAFSA workshop? On the right side, what percentage completed their FAFSA form? So now you have more information about how did we implement. On the bottom, is anyone better off? So did it work? Like, who cares if we filled out 1 million FAFSA forms? Did it help anyone? On the bottom left, how many kids received funding based on their FAFSA completion? And then on the right side, what percentage of your student body was able to successfully submit their FAFSA form? So it's starting to ask these 3 questions. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And who was impacted as a result? And asking these questions, this is like a whole different kind of data. This is like how many teachers were trained? What percentage of them rated the training as highly effective? How many assessments have been given? And what percentage of those assessments did kids spend more than 5 minutes? This is starting to get deeper into fidelity, right? And effectiveness. Is anyone better off? I'll take a deep breath. Thought on these 3 questions. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And who was impacted as a result? I'm curious, do you guys have ways you're measuring this now?
I think we're lacking in this. I think it's very seems like common sense sort of ideas and stuff, but it's very good. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think we're right there with you. Like, we jump into our insights meetings and all we talk about is your ELA results. But the more we develop out Clarity, our strategic planning platform, the more we're starting, like we've got to create data about, please report if you've done this, like what percentage of the action is completed? Who was benefited by the action? What are the updates on the action? Is anyone liking this action? So even we at Parsec, we're not doing a great job sharing with you results from performance accountability. But that's where we're leaning more into real and leaning more into Clarity to start to have that data of how much are we doing? How well are we doing it? And is it impacting anybody today? All right, next slide, Robert. So, you can just do this quadrant with anybody. So, we've, in the name of time, we'll jump through this, but, if we, the parent night example to increase FAFSA forms, or let's say, free and reduced lunch forms, major impact on your funding. Like if that's an initiative, you have a parent night, you can go through this process of thinking, how many parents came through the system? What percentage of them filled out the free and reduced lunch form? And then what impact did it have on families? Like who was able to receive assistance because of that effort? And then what percentage of families eligible received? When you have this information, you can actually speak to, did we implement this well? And did it show signs of effect? And those two questions are really important rather than just waiting till the state results come out. All right, next slide. Sorry, that same mailman comes every day and my dog attacks him every day. All right, what is one thing that stood out to you so far? I'm just curious, just to step back. We'll move on. I know time's getting tight. All right, next slide. So budgeting. So one thing is tying this to academic return on investment. Like, what does this look like from an academic return on investment stance? So go to that next slide, Robert. When we talk about academic return on investment, here's the formula, right? Academic return on investment is a function of what increase did you have in the result you were seeking? So if it's number of parents filling out the FAFSA form, that's the result you're looking for. So what is the result we're looking for? Increase in student learning. And then how many students were impacted by that effort? Divided by the number of dollars spent on that effort. So this is, this trend is really growing, and there's some really large districts that are starting to think about, we want to pay contracts based on the return of student success or results. So we want to pay out contracts based on the results that the service achieves. So there's this pressure to put results at the center of how we spend money. Where did we spend money, and did it achieve a return? At its root, if you are monitoring fidelity, and if you are monitoring effectiveness well, and you're monitoring your budget, and you're very strategic about where you're spending money, this is a natural conversation that you're having. But I think when you look at results-based accountability, it sets you up well to talk about academic return on investment. Because you'll know. Think about the three questions. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And who was impacted as a result? Those three questions, when answered well, can fit right into this formula and start to calculate academic return on investment for you and your system. And I mean, not to trigger trauma for anybody, but I mean, I'm a school board president of our local school board, and I'm curious what funding is going to look like over the next 3 years. And so I'm really nervous for our school personally. Like, what about our IDEA funds? What about our Title I funds? I anticipate they'll come to us in some form, but I'm getting more and more concerned about, as a board member, we've got to be really lightning focused on where we spend money, because we've got to spend money on the things that are implemented well and work. So this mentality starts to kind of help as you think about, where you choose to spend money. All right, Robert. Of course, you guys know this, but this whole process is if you know how much you did, how well you did it, and who was improved or who was impacted as a result, when that works, you can know it works, but when it doesn't work, you can figure out why. And if you're not implementing well and your indicators aren't identified well, then it's hard for you to ask these 5 questions. And so as you start to look at where are you spending money and what are you doing, figuring out these root causes requires that you're constantly in this results-based cycle. This is what we think works. This is what we tried in our plan. This is what it did to our indicator. And so we're going to respond accordingly. If you're in that cycle, you're constantly asking yourself the 5 whys, because you're grounded in watching those indicators and the strategies that you chose. Next one. And I talk about this a lot. There are a lot of partners that are really good at setting goals. We see that a lot, right? Like we have this big aspirational goal. And then I have a lot of partners that, they might have a really strong system. But if you have a goal and you have a system, those 2 things together, that's where results-based accountability is really helpful. You're really laser focused on what is the result and what is the indicator that is a proxy for that result. And then what system are we putting in place to, like, over time bend the trend to get the result that we want. So results-based accountability and just thinking about the world in this way where results are at the center, both population results and performance results, starts to help get you in this frame where you've got a goal and you've got a system to get there. And if that system isn't working, you'll know and you'll be able to respond. All right, Robert. That's what I have. I'm curious to just open it up. Got 4 minutes left. Thoughts, comments, advice for others. I'm just curious, what's on y'all's mind as we wrap up the webinar. Thanks, Mina. I appreciate it.
So Marshall, I'm not actually sure where I got the invite to this meeting from, and but it's cool. I like what you're looking at, but I'm wondering like what your system actually looks like, how it aggregates data, and how some of these broader ideas that we're talking about, like how do you quantify them and make them usable?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alan. And Robert, and you can reach out to any of us and we can show you any of that. I think when we provide this webinar, I think on the back end, this gives you a little sense of the foundation or the why. Like, what are the ideas and beliefs that drive Parsec? Because you're going to see the way our products are arranged by educators, for educators, is like, this is the underpinning of what we believe that drives how we arrange our products. So you'll see, like in our dashboards, that's why we believe the trend data is so important. So bringing in all of your data and not just seeing this year and last year, but seeing the last 10 years, seeing that trend over time, you'll see that that's kind of a hallmark of how we present data. And then I'm personally working on Clarity right now, which is our strategic planning platform. And it is basically productizing this type of mentality. Like, how can we create a product that makes this kind of accountability easy and natural and occurs kind of in the background for you? So, I mean, just to be honest, like that's where our head's at, is this is really tough to do, but how do we get the whole team aligned and clear about the goal? That's why it's called Clarity. How do we get really clear about the result we're seeking and everyone's role in achieving that result? Yes, but we'd love to talk to you more about that if you wanted. What else? Thank you guys. I see some notes in the chat. Appreciate y'all. Matt, I have this, like, your background gives me a desire. Like, I'm curious of all the brain work that is hanging on that wall.
Yeah, it's been growing this year, but lot of student work. Some of it's my kids.
That's awesome.
That's my son's project from work last year. Yeah,
That's
good stuff. Thanks for noticing.
it's a cool background. It kind of makes it would be a really good actually like educator stock background. It's a good one. All right, anything else? Oh, I mean, you guys can have these slides. You can definitely use them for, it's not stealing. They're yours, so anybody can use them and have them. All right, anything else? We're at time and I know you guys are super busy. I'll stick on if anybody wants to talk or discuss anything, but otherwise, you guys, we are rooting for you. I know it's test season. We all know it's craziness right now in schools and we appreciate you guys. Let us know if we can do anything to help or anything we can help provide. I appreciate meeting you all and chatting today.